Does that make sense? What do you think I mean by a blessing or a curse in between points? So that time that you've got in between a rally, when the point finishes to the point begins, how can that both be a blessing or a curse?
You can use it to reset, or you could use it negatively, just get more frustrated, like you've had a bad rally before, and just beat yourself up to the rally.
Yeah, exactly. So you can use it to refocus and reset and go through positive thoughts and behaviours that will keep many things going, which we'll discuss a bit later. Or it can be used as a curse. If things aren't going well, that time's great if you use it correctly, but if you maybe go through negative thoughts and behaviours and don't do anything about them in between points, then future points just aren't going to go as well. It's going to be a lot more difficult to get back to the level that you want to get back to. Does that make sense? Cool. So yeah, like I said, it's going to be a bit more of a discussion, but this is generally the structure we're going to follow today. We're going to talk about the importance of in-between points. We're going to have a look at consistency, because in terms of linking up the points, consistency of what you do in between points equals a greater chance of momentum. And we all agree that momentum is an important thing when we're playing, right? And we'll talk about why in between points is so important when trying to achieve momentum or kind of keeping momentum as well. Then we're going to have a look at reactions after good and bad points, what the differences are, maybe what you should be doing after good points and after bad points. And we're going to have a little think about, is it worth coming up with a routine, which a lot of athletes will do already, and some of you will have a pre-serve routine already, I'd imagine. And if you do, maybe the information that you'll learn today will help you maybe build upon it and make it more beneficial in terms of your performance. Sound good? Okay, so to start with, I think that this is pretty good. It is to do with tennis, and there are differences in the timings of tennis and squash, I'm aware, but I think that this is a really good quote from an article which the headline of was "Professional tennis players are wasting our time." And it's talking about the time actually spent playing compared to the time spent in between points. So this example here is Andy Murray's almost 3-hour second round match lasted 2 hours and 41 minutes. That's 3 minutes shorter than the average men's single match at last year's US Open, but they only actively played points for 26 minutes, 29 seconds. So only 16.4% of those 2 hours, 41 minutes was it spent actually playing. The rest was in between points, and the rest was at change of ends. Now, this article they were trying to be a little bit funny in terms of the headline was "Tennis players are wasting our time" and things like that, but I look at it in a little bit of a different way. I'm thinking to myself, well, that just shows that in-between points are just as important, if not more, in tennis as the points themselves. Because over 80% of time is spent in between points where, like we said before, your thoughts and your actions can be either a blessing or a curse. Now, I have no idea. I tried to find a stat similar to squash, but couldn't find anything. Now, it's not going to be anything like that. Obviously, the timings are completely different. And from what I've noticed as well, in between points in squash are a lot shorter than tennis. I'd say maybe the average in tennis is about 10 to 15 seconds, maybe 20 seconds, some people. If you're talking Rafa Nadal, he's at least 25. But in squash, I mean, what do you guys think the average is, or the average time that you spend in between points?
10 seconds.
10? Sure? About that?
That's been done. It's usually, the average is 8 to 10 seconds, but has anyone noticed anything changing within that? I think like there's noticeable increase in the amount of time that people are taking between points now than there used to be in the past. Does anyone agree with that? Or disagree with that?
I think it's just quite individual, isn't it? Like, at one time I was playing Barrett, and he literally served like so quickly, and I always couldn't get ready in time. Like he would just walk and just serve straight away. But I think it's different for everyone.
Sure. So about 8 to 10 seconds, but like Paul said, it's increasing, and that's potentially increasing because there's a lot more literature, there's a lot more kind of articles out there on the importance of the time that you take in between points. Of course, it changes from individuals depending on what they like, what their personality is, and at the end of today, there's not going to be a set time that all of you guys will take. I'm not going to say, right, I think you should take 12 seconds, I think you should take 15 seconds. That's for you to decide after maybe gaining some knowledge from our discussions today. But I thought that would be a good thing to show, because I think we spend more time in between points than we think if we add up all of the seconds, either in between points or at the end of games, in between games as well. If we added that up, I think it would probably be a considerable amount of time. And if there's nothing kind of set in stone and consistent with that time, then we're maybe going to be struggling with focus, or we potentially wouldn't get to the optimal mindset consistently throughout, again, which links to momentum. So, with that in mind, that wasn't supposed to happen. Well, the bit underneath says, is there a difference? Oh, jeez, apologies. Is there a difference in what you do or think in between points regardless of the outcome? So what do you guys do in between points just now, just in general? What are some things?
I've whipped my hand on the wall in perspective.
Okay.
Then I'm concentrating, bounce the ball a few times, take my time.
Okay, that's good. So those are physical things that you'll do. What's the reason for wiping your hands on the wall?
Get sweaty.
Yeah.
Take a bit of time as well.
Sure.
I feel like when I concentrate, I notice myself bouncing the ball, taking longer between points.
Okay, that's cool.
Notice myself doing that.
Interesting. And doing things like that help you stay in the present, right? And we've kind of spoken a little bit about that before, and I'm sure you've heard it from other people, that if you think in the past, if you think about past points, whether they've gone really well or not, or you think in the future in terms of only X amount of points to go until I've won, or I could win this, or etc., etc. It's not good for your focus, it's not good for your performance. But doing cues like bouncing the ball or wiping your hand on the wall, those keep you in the present, because you can only focus on one thing at once, right? And doing something as simple as that can bring you back to the here and now, which is important. That's cool. Does anyone else do anything different to that?
Sometimes I feel I don't get a bad spell.
Mm-hmm.
Points. I'll take my glasses off, bring them. Just gonna get myself some time to reset myself.
That's cool. Okay. So you take, so following a run of bad points maybe, or if it was one significantly bad point, you would stop.
Yeah, just kind of get myself to kind of relax again and get my mind kind of reset.
That's good. Yeah.
Can I know, there's quite a lot of examples in squash. I can think of 3 world number ones that have a really, really specific, repeatable, in between points routine. Does anybody got any ideas who I'm thinking about?
David Palmer, Rishi.
Yeah, so what does David Palmer do?
Is it bullseye? I don't know what it's called. The temple.
He like taps his shoulder.
Yeah, pulls the tongue, puts his foot down to the floor, and then right, that's him ready for the next point. Every single point, he does that. Peter Nicol, what did he do?
Fix his strings.
I know Nick Matthew like says like strings and length, like just try to hit the strings with the ball. And he said that that's just like the simplest thing that he can think of, and he said that helps him. That's the only one.
He's got he does his multiple of 7 bounces as well, doesn't he? So he's every single time it's either 7, 14 or 21 bounces of the ball.
Hmm.
He has some little fidgety things that he always does.
Yeah.
I can't remember
Those are like
specific ones,
checks.
Yeah, that's it. It's like it happens, and whether they're that obvious, like harm is an obvious one because it's just like what the hell are you doing? You need to do that every single day. But like some people will be really obvious, but a lot of the top guys, most of the top guys will have something that they'll be like, okay, that's my reset, and then I'm ready for the next.
Sure.
one.
And it's so important to have that consistency, like Paul said, that no matter what, they're going to be doing that, and it's quite obvious that it's in the same order every single time. Because no matter what's happening in the match, the last thing that they do before their serves is either bounce at an X amount of times, or will fix their strings, think about strings and length, of these things, which makes them feel comfortable, because no matter if it's the first in between the first 2 points, or if it's, I don't know, a really tight pressured point in the match, you're going to be doing exactly the same things. And when you're doing exactly the same things, you feel more comfortable. That's your routine. Does that make sense? So even though you've maybe gone through a run of bad points and you've taken off your glasses and you wipe them just to kind of take a little bit more time and compose yourself, if you don't do anything after that, then you're very aware, and your brain is also very aware that, okay, that was because there was a disappointing situation in play and this is maybe a key moment. It's like the same thing if you see some people take longer before big points, which in my mind is a kind of silly thing to do, because you're just building up that pressure. You're used to going at a reasonable pace, but then as soon as there's a pressured point, you take longer, leaving more time for your brain to start thinking different thoughts, especially if you've not got a routine before you serve. Does that make sense? Who here changes up what they do in between points depending where they are in the match and things? Yeah? Have you got an example?
I don't know, I'm just overthinking it now, like an opportunity, or I'm like behind in the game, I think.
Yeah.
Take a bit longer or something, just like you said, probably some,
Sure.
and then that's
Well, it's a normal thing to do though, isn't it? Because you want to try and better yourself. But if there's not a structure or an order or a routine in place, you end up spending much more time. Your thoughts are a bit more disorganized, so you can start to overthink.
yeah.
Whereas if you have a set structure in place, obviously what you think in between every point is going to be different. But the structure could be the same. So at this moment in time, I'm going to think about tactics. At this moment in time, I'm maybe going to say a cue word to myself that keeps me in the present. At this moment in time, I'm going to wipe my hand against the wall. And if you're quite clear on that, then the same amount of time is going to be spent in between points, but you're going to be fixing whatever needs fixed or reminding yourself what's going well, so that going into the next point, you've kind of got a clear idea of what you want to do, but you've not spent any more time and you've not built up pressure within yourself. Does that make sense? Does anyone else do things differently?
I guess bringing it back to the consistency, like, I'm always thinking about not changing anything as such.
Okay.
Trying to be as consistent as possible with how I'm going about it and making sure that there's no real differentiation between the winning or losing. It's kind of the same idea, but unconsciously I'll do things differently.
Okay. Sure.
Like you can, like I can pick up on a few things that I would do if I was like down or if I was up, but I still kind of try and follow the same, whether I'm up or down, I try to follow the same kind of idea about what I'm going to do and all that sort of stuff.
That's good. So that's more in terms of your thoughts, what you're thinking about, and not your...
Even just like, say you've won a point, I'll still do the same, try and do the same things over and over again.
Okay. So what are those things you're talking about?
It's like for example, like, I would wipe my hand on the wall pretty much whatever point it was. Not if I won or lost, it's not really.
That's good.
It's just more about like it's like it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before about controlling the control. If I can that into that space, it's my time.
Yeah.
But then I think unconsciously you like do certain things in different ways. Like if it's going through a bad run of points, I'm like fix my strings. Like I wouldn't fix my strings all the time.
Sure.
When I'm up, sometimes I fix my strings, but when I'm down, I also will fix my strings. Like it's not necessarily a case of I'm down, I need to fix my strings now. It's like
Yeah.
It's just like
It's whatever you feel at that moment in time. Yeah.
It's not like I don't have one strategy. I got a bunch of them. It's just we've got to keep mixing them up to make sure that I don't kind of get focused on I'm down or I'm up. It's kind of there's like a whole bunch you can go to.
Yeah.
Just to as a more controllables. So whether it's fix my headband, but make sure my bandana's tied tight, my shoelaces, use strings, like my wristband. Like there's a bunch of them that I wouldn't do all at the same time.
No.
But like I've got a bunch of them that I can like rely on to be there. If you see what I mean?
That's good. Yeah. So you've identified what you can control.
Yeah.
And you want to kind of keep general things consistent throughout, but specifically the things that you do in between points will change depending on the situation.
I'm quite an overthinker about generally. So if I've got something that's just a bit more like tactful, as in like this could work, or like it keeps me focused on different things rather than overthinking one thing.
Yeah.
So say if I fix my string every time I lost a point, say, I would get fixated upon people on losing points. I've moved my strings a lot.
Sure.
But if I'm winning and I'm still fixing my strings or I'm bouncing the ball, whatever, it's not like it's routines, but it's a bunch of routines that I can go through, which
Yes. Yeah.
novel as such, rather than someone being able to pick up on, oh, he's doing that a lot, because I'm obviously getting him to think and focus on that rather than what he's actually doing in this game.
Sure. Okay. So I like that. I like that there's not necessarily a set in stone order of things that you do, but you do keep it consistent.
Yeah.
No matter if the point's going well or the point didn't go that well. You've kept it consistent in terms of the things that you do and you think about. Can anyone else relate to that? Yeah.
I think if I'm losing badly, I'll probably change it up a bit.
Yeah.
Because in my head I'm like, well, if I'm losing badly and I keep on doing the same thing, I'm going to lose. But then I'll try to do something different. Like I think some players do it quite well, like waste a bit of time and it really like stops your momentum against me.
Sure. Cool. Okay. So this was supposed to come up afterwards, and that was supposed to disappear. I don't know what's happened, but essentially, there it says consistency equals momentum, which, again, you've got some consistency of what you do in between points. Yeah, sometimes it changes, but the meaning behind it stays the same, which is good. And consistency does equal momentum, right? If we were to think about it in points, if you were to consistently win points, the momentum would generally be in your side, right? But if you were to consistently do the same things, think the same way, not necessarily about the same things, but think the same way in between points, then that's also consistency. So no matter what's happening in the match, if you're doing set things every time in between points, momentum's not necessarily affected as much. Yeah, because I think when you hear commentators in any sport, if you watch any sort of sport on TV, momentum comes into play so much. They talk about momentum all the time. Oh, this team's got the momentum, that team's got the momentum, as if it's this kind of amazing thing that will dictate everything. But I don't necessarily think that momentum is one kind of line. So if you have got momentum, your opponent's not got momentum. Or if you don't have momentum, your opponent's got momentum, and that just switches. Right? I'd say that momentum is actually, you've got your momentum, your opponent's got their momentum. Can both go up, can both go down. But it's up to you in terms of how you keep that consistent. Momentum doesn't need to change if you have a run of bad points. You could still have momentum, right? If you're doing and thinking the right things in between points, that's more likely to happen as well. Okay. There we go. Okay. So, I think it's important to talk about positive reactions. Right? We're not going to talk about negative reactions today. We've spoken about them before. And we'll all know now that negative reactions are natural. We all get them. And it's very, very difficult for you not to have negative reactions because that's how our brain's programmed. So when something happens, we get a negative thought. When something bad happens, we get a negative thought. If we're going into a pressured situation, we get a negative thought. Maybe the what ifs will come in. If we hit a bad shot, we're like, oh, that was rubbish, something like that, and that's fine. That's uncontrollable. But what we can control is our positive reactions in relation to those negative ones. So in terms of things that we do in between points, it's important to focus on the positive reactions. So what are some positive reactions to bad points, do you think? I'm going to have a few up here, just general ones, but I want to give the ball to you guys with this one. What are some positive reactions after bad points, both in here and physically as well?
Body language.
Okay, yeah.
Like if you have a bad point, if you kind of like just kind of take a big deep breath and like kind of pump your chest out a little bit, kind of feel like that was a bad point. I'm gonna kind of get that momentum going the other way.
Sure.
So I'm like trying to show that bad point didn't affect you. It's just one. It's just a new point. So let's move on to that.
That's good. Yeah. So two things there really. Firstly, body language, which is hugely important, and we don't often actively think about it. A lot of the time, if you watch squash matches or any sport, what happens in the match or the stage of competition affects body language, which is not true. You are in complete control of your body language, and like you said, it's important that following a bad point, you make it look as if you're not affected. So you can stick your chest out, your shoulders back, your head up, wide stance, maybe slow movements. That's a good sign of body language as well. Having your racket up is important, right? That's a big sign of positive body language. A lot of the time we see people just kind of swinging their racket, or they're a bit annoyed and it's kind of drooping down low, right? Being more positive can be achieved by just holding your racket up as well, right? Because it makes us feel better. The bonus is that it maybe shows our opponent that we're not affected, like you said, but the big advantage of having good body language is it makes us feel better straight away. We can just easily stick our chest out and our shoulders back, and whether it's 1% or 2%, it makes us feel better, which is important. And then the second part, you said there's breathing. So why is it important to breathe? To survive.
I think sometimes it's that idea of just controlling your, if you're all tense and stuff, kind of lets out everything.
Sure.
If you take a big deep breath and let it out, you kind of just kind of focus on that rather than anything else that's going on, and just kind of reset your whole idea.
Yeah, so there's quite a few positives from breathing. One just being get more oxygen to the brain, better decision making, right? Makes you feel physically more loose, especially if you're in a tight situation. You see a lot of people in tight situations, and maybe their body's a bit tighter than usual, and they don't do anything, they just go into the next point, and shots just don't come off the way that they normally would in training because they're that bit tighter because of the pressure, because of nerves. Breathing can really help just loosen up those muscles a little bit. Another thing you said there is it can help you stay in the moment. If you're focusing on that, you're not focusing on anything else. So focusing on a really deep breath is a good thing to do as well. And it can just relax, as well as it relaxing your body, it can relax your mind too. So a deep breath's a good one, yeah.
Surely just going through your routine, like you were saying, like regardless of it being a bad working point, just if you have that set routine, just go through that regardless.
Sure, okay.
It shows that, well, show your opponent you're not affected. It's just a point.
Yeah. Okay, I like it. So if you have a good routine, sticking to that, yeah, okay.
I think I would be like, if I lost the rally, I'd be like, why did I lose it? And like, how am I going to change it? For me, that's quite a big thing. Like, because if I know I'm seeing red when I just lose the rally, and I'm like, I'm not thinking about anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's for me like quite a big thing.
Sure. And with that, it's always important to focus on what next. Because when we get stuck on what we've done poorly or what we've been doing wrong, it can get us frustrated. It gets us stuck in the past again, like I said, which we don't want to focus on. So getting all of the information, like you said, right, what have I not been doing well? Or what was wrong there? But then going, how do I change that moving in? So what do I need to adapt? Does that make sense? So not just going, right, okay, that was poor. Right, that was poor, so next time I'm going to do this. And it's really, really important that you do that second stage. You go, so next time, this is what I'm going to do. Because if you just say that I'm getting around the court slowly, I'm too slow, I'm too slow, I'm too slow, so you're just kind of reinforcing that, and it's really just the question, it's not the answer, isn't it? I'm going slowly.
That's a really crucial point. I feel. I think sarcasm fits into this stuff as well. Like how often do we go, "Oh, that was great, wasn't it?" After you just put it into the tin or something like that. Like you win a point off of the stroke after you played a bad shot, and just like, "Oh, great shot, Paul." Yeah, everyone does it, but it fits into this really nicely because if you're not putting the right thoughts into your own mind, previous way, then they're not going to be as impactful when you actually come to want to use that attribute for yourself.
Do you think there's like a place for that though? In like not taking yourself too seriously, say you've done something like absolutely shocking.
Okay.
Just have a laugh at yourself.
If that helps you move on from it,
Instead of just going all
For-
get all serious and
for sure. But again,
depends.
if it helps you move on initially, then great. But you don't want it to happen again. So at the end of the day, it's probably worth thinking about what you need to do instead, or what you need to do better next time. So yeah, like I said, be problem solvers. Squash is a game of problem solving. If you just focus on the question, or focus on the problem, should I say, if you focus on the problem, say you move around the court too slowly, nothing will change. Okay, maybe something naturally will change, but it's more likely to change if you focus on the solution. So what is the solution to that? Simply, I'm moving around the court too slow. You've identified the problem. What's the solution?
Get faster.
And maybe how? Maybe lighter in the feet. Something like that. So you're problem solving. Again, simple example, but important. What's maybe another one? What's something that you guys have focused on that's been wrong?
Like,
And how do you
maybe
move
like
on?
when I'm hitting the ball, like sometimes I'll be hitting it, like say on drives, I'll be hitting it too late, and then it'll just be like hitting front ball, side ball quite early, and then it's like if that's happening in a rally, then I'll kind of try and like, why is that happening, and how am I going to fix it? Like during the rally still going on,
Sure.
like just try and take it out earlier in front of me, or like coming around it a little bit less, kind of thing. Just trying out different things that will like be the solution.
Sure. And as simple as it sounds, it's something that a lot of people don't do. A lot of people will just focus on the problem rather than be clear into what they're going to be doing next.
There's a couple of really good examples of this that top players in the world do, alright? So Nicole David's one of them, but we won't focus on her since it's a group of guys. But what does Rami do after he has made a mistake usually, or played a bad point?
I don't know, but I do think Nicole David's like the best person in the world. Like she's a person that like, you just consistently see afterwards, like hitting it again, or like saying, yeah, like that was the right shot.
Yeah, that's it. She does a swing, like that's what it should have been. And Rami's the same. If he puts something in the tin, he grabs the ball and then plays the shot again. That's what it should have been. Right? And it's interesting when you see him playing like Shibagi and stuff, because they're both like sprinting after the ball because Shibagi doesn't want to let him do that. So they're both like fighting for the ball so that Rami can't do his little positive reinforcement after he's made a mistake. Shibagi's like, nah, you're going to make that mistake again. You're not practicing it.
Which is important. So that's, again, a good example because they're doing something physical in terms of the problem solving, saying what to do next, but also at the same time I'd imagine that they'll be going through the instruction in their head. So it goes back to or reframing negative thoughts. It's kind of like an instructional reframe, right? So next time I'm going to do this rather than focusing on the problem, which, like I said, it's a lot harder to move on if we focus on the problem. Good. Anything else? So we've spoken about quite a lot already, so we'll go through mine and maybe discuss them a little bit more, and maybe that'll trigger some more answers from you guys. Body language, first one. I've spoken about that. Taking time to compose. Right? If we consistently take time to compose, whether that's after a good point or a bad point, like I said, consistency is good. And I think people get caught up too much in keeping momentum, so going, right, okay, I just won a great point, so I'm going to go straight back in. Well, would it not be a better idea to think about why the point was so good, which will improve confidence? And it would also make you more likely to achieve that again. Why was it so good, and how can I do that again? Does that make sense?
Think about if you think about these things on the flip side, like when you make errors, then that clicks into your head, doesn't it? And then suddenly you find yourself making like 5 or 6 of the same error over the course of the game. So why can't we turn that the other way around? So every time you hit a really positive winner, why can't we click into that so then you hit that winner 5 or 6 times over the course of the game instead? We focus attention on it when it's a negative thing, but if we could try and focus the attention onto things when we do the positive thing, just like, oh yeah, that was great, let's get that work in and fire it in every time, and then suddenly you hit and roll. Like anyone that does a feeding session, after 10 or 20 shots, you're feeling like, God, I can hit this all day long. And it's just that positive reinforcement that you get over and over again, and you've got the ability to have that in a match too. But we tend to just back off the positive thing.
Yeah.
When we hold on to the negative one, and that's exactly what this is all about.
It's true, and there's a lot to that for sure. We do spend a lot of time focusing on what's wrong because we want to be the best that we can be. Right? We're athletes. We want to be the best that we can be in one way. I think if you were to ask anyone in the world, right, okay, how do you better yourself? They'll say, work on the things that I'm not as good at, or focus on my areas to develop. So of course, when something goes wrong in a match, spend time focusing on that, whether it's in the best way possible, like figuring out the solution, or just focusing on the problem. That's what we do. And when things are going well, that's great. And you keep going until there's a mistake, and then I focus on that again. Yeah? So when things are going well, it's important not just to congratulate yourself. All right? We spoke a little bit about this last time in terms of when bad things happen, we're quite good at getting down on ourselves, going through negative self-talk and things like that. But when things go really well, we don't show too much. So it's important to get that balance as well. So when things are going well, congratulating yourself, and also thinking, it's like the same as before. What was good about that point, and how do I keep that going? So if there was a mistake or something bad, what was wrong there? How do I fix it? If there's something good, what was great there? What was good there? And how do I keep that going? How do I do that again? Is there a way that I can do that? Does that make sense? Cool. What's another one? Pre-serve routine. So a lot of people, like I said at the start, will have a pre-serve routine. They might not have an in-between point routine, right? But they have a pre-serve routine, whether that's bouncing the ball or taking a breath or maybe bouncing around or something like that. So that, again, like you said, is a good thing to do following bad situations.
I'd say it's, like for me, when I'm serving, it's much easier to concentrate. I mean, I'm sure some of that's because you're just one point, but I feel like when you can serve, when you're the one serving, like, you're in control, and it's much easier to stay in.
Yes, absolutely. But when you're returning and receiving,
I feel like I've got less control and I'm a bit more edgy.
absolutely. And it's like you said as well, sometimes you were playing against that person.
Yeah.
You serve straight away. It's like, oh my God, I've got no time. Is there a way around that?
You can slow it down a bit.
I think some players do it really well, like the whole momentum thing. Like if they've just got a run of points to their opponent, they'll be standing there like ready to serve, and the person will serve it, and then they'll just like not return it,
Mm-hmm.
like ask for the score, just say something, and like the amount of times that I've seen like really like squash, like street smart kind of players do that, and it just works like so often.
Mm-hmm.
It's ridiculous.
So, yeah, just being quite bold and saying, no, I wasn't ready, and things like that.
When you work, like they're doing it on purpose.
Yeah. Just certainly a good thing to do. I mean, it's in between the point again. When you're serving, you're in complete control. When you're not serving, you're not in as much control, but that time in between point is still your time. If you're not in the ready position, they're not going to serve. If you're not at that location where you are generally ready to return, they're not going to serve. So it might be worth thinking about that. If you feel like at the start of a match someone's going really quickly, go, right, okay, well, I'll just take a little bit longer so I can compose myself to get to the ready position, because they're not going to serve if they see you at the front of the court, if that makes sense. So even though your opponent's in control when they're serving, you still have some control. So that's important. Next up, there's positive self-talk. So we've spoken about that lots before. It's very easy to just let our negative thoughts kind of take over. But it's important that we fill up our mind with positive thoughts. Whether that's instructionally. So I would say a positive thought is, okay, that was wrong. This is what I'm going to do next time. That's a good instructional positive thought. But sometimes you're going to need that motivation like we've spoken about before. So motivating yourself, saying, no, okay, this is my point. Something like that. That's happened, it's fine. Get the next one. Something like that. Really, really important. What else do we have? Targets and tactics. So some people, I don't know if you guys do it, some people will have maybe 2 or 3 targets to do with their tactics that they'll create before the match. If they know their opponent's strengths and weaknesses before the match, it might be to do with that, but it can also be to do with what you're working on at that moment in time in training, something you want to keep on top of. But in between a point, no matter what, no matter if things are going well or things aren't going well, they'll say these 2 or 3 points to themselves. Does anyone do that? Well, writing it down could be a good idea, but in between points, reciting those to yourself as well. So kind of always, no matter what's going on, reverting back to those targets.
I think it kind of comes from like understanding like what happened and what's next.
Okay.
Because if I go and I'm like, I'd be absolutely dominated for that previous point, I'll be like, right, I need to get the ball back behind them. And it's not necessarily like a target, it's like, per se, I have to hit the ball here. It's just like, right, if I start doing this, then I can work on the next.
Sure.
It's not an idea of going like, it's more of the tactics side of it, but going like, if I hit the ball short and cut it off every time, it's like, well, I need to get the ball to hit that back wall and just make it hit the back wall first, and then work on to the next one. And so you've got like that idea of, this is what I'm going to do, and then I've got the next stage to go to.
Sure. Sure, so it's kind of dealing with what's going on in the match.
It's like trying to solve the problem by making it equal.
Mm-hmm.
It's like balancing it. So it's like, well, they did this to me last time, I need to get behind them so that then I can start from like a clean slate and I can do whatever I need to do and move from there.
Sure, okay. And some people will do both as well, and I think it's a really good idea to do both. So if you have, say, the point finishes, and you problem solve like that, and you figured out how to move on tactically at that moment in time, whether things have gone well, how to keep on top of that, or things haven't gone well, and how to keep on top of that. You've figured out what's going to be happening next, but then you've got these general goals or targets that you want to achieve for you throughout, and those could be to do with your movement or to do with something technical, whatever you're working on in training. those are really good things to have because they'll just bring you back to what you want to achieve as well. Does that make sense? And I think that, yeah, no matter if the point's good or bad, having those targets fresh in your mind, if they're positive and clear instructions, they can just keep that focus a bit consistent. Especially if you're struggling with problem solving, you've got, well, things aren't going well for me, but here's clear instructions that I set out before that I want to keep achieving throughout. And then our words are cued to stay in the present. We've spoken about loads of more things, but I think it would be good for you guys to have a little think about what you do in between points, and maybe coming up with a standards routine that you could be doing. So our word or cue to stay in the present could be here, now, this one, something like that, next point, that just helps you focus on the now, focus on what's about to come up rather than, again, what's been going wrong or what's been going really well. You've already done that. Just before you serve, maybe having a cue to focus on the present rather than anything else. Does that make sense? Okay. Positive reactions to good points, and reverting back to the point of consistency equals momentum, guess what? It's the same. Right? Oh. It's the same. No matter if the point is going well or not well, it's important that you're doing all of these things. Of course, your thoughts will be different depending on the situation. But again, like I said, thinking about the last point and figuring what next can be done if the point's good or bad. It's always important to have body language after good and bad points. It's always important to talk to yourself positively no matter what. And I think that it's important that your routine doesn't necessarily change. Whether you're serving or not serving, or whether the last point's gone good or bad. Of course, when you're not serving, it's not like you're going to be bouncing the ball. Right? But you can be going through the same thought processes. You can be wiping your hand in the wall still. You can be doing all of these things right up until the ready position. And like I said, if you have a set thing that you do, momentum is more likely going to be going in your favor. Yeah? So I'd keep that in your mind as well when thinking about routines going into the future, is going, right, okay, am I doing the same thing here? Or am I changing it up because of the situation I'm in? So, having an in-between point routine can give you a more consistent mindset and make you a more consistent player at the end. Okay? So what I want you guys to do just now is maybe have a think about what yours could be. So who could say right now, who could come up, if there was a whiteboard here, well there is actually, who could come up and write down their exact routine from when the point finishes to when the point begins? That is the same every time. Potentially. Like you said, it's consistent, but there's different things. So I think that it's important that you start thinking about this kind of stuff and start going, right, okay, do I come up with a specific order? Is that something that I want? And what kind of things can I include, right? So just now, I want you to have a look at these, because it's a combination of thoughts and behaviours. So things that you think about and things that you do that will combine to make a good routine. So on the left-hand side are the questions that are maybe good to ask yourself and things to think about as well. On the right-hand side are some examples of good things that you can do as well. Now, if you've got a bit of paper or if you've got your phone, you could maybe do it in notes, but the last thing that I want to do before we finish up is maybe give you a chance to maybe write down a good routine that could work for you, that you could go and try. And if it works, that's good, keep on top of it. And if it doesn't work, maybe adapt it. But at the end of the day, it's very important that you have set things that you can do in between points, so those times are filled up and are used as a blessing rather than a curse, like I said at the start. So maybe for 5 minutes just now. If you've not got paper, just use your phones. And there's not a right or wrong. There can be 3 things that you include in it. There can be 8. It doesn't really matter. This will change just depending on personal preference. And maybe you'll probably do a few of these things already, but it's just about getting that a little bit more consistent.
I think it's using a mixture of what you do already and any things you find that are useful with it. Or you think could be added.
Sure. And yeah, just making sure that there's a kind of clear order that works well for you. Because I would probably include more thinking at the start and more behaviours at the end. Because you don't want to be standing in the service box about to serve and going, right, okay, what was poor and how do I fix this? Right? You want to be at that point ready to serve. Or you don't want to be ready for a return and going, right, okay, what was poor in the last point? Now? So I'd say that those kind of things are good to think about at the start of the routine, and at the end, maybe breathing, maybe a bit of motivational self-talk or a word or cue or targets or things like that that are just that more likely to be a bit more consistent could be a good idea. Does that pen work? Because something that I think would be a good idea, will this stain, is the question. I don't want to... No, we're fine. Okay, so this will be a beautiful drawing of a court. All right, so right, okay. Okay, so what I try and do, see when I do this in individual sessions, we think a lot more about it. Obviously this is just raising awareness, and if you've got any questions about it, feel free to get in touch. But what I tend to do is maybe, right, okay, is there an area where it's better to think and an area where it's better to just complete actions? So make all of your decisions in one specific area, and when your mind is made up, when your decisions have been made, then that's it. So something I like to do is maybe have a think box and a do box, right? So a think box could be here, and obviously your do box, depending on if you're serving or receiving, would be here, right? So when the point's finished, going to your think box, or the think box could be up here, just depending on what is natural. But you have a space where you kind of go through all the ones like what went well and why, what was poor and how do I fix this? Are my tactics working? Is my opponent, what is my opponent doing well? What are my opponent's weaknesses? Do I need to adapt and how, right? And then when your decisions have been made, and you've thought about your tactics, you've thought if there's been anything to adapt or whatever, you go into the do box. In the do box, that's where you complete more behavior. So, okay, I'm going to go here, deep breath, bounce the ball, and ready to go. So there's lots of different things. Again, it's up to personal preference, If you like breathing, then that could be something that you could do. Wiping a hand on the wall, that's also something that you could do. That's just a guideline. You don't need to do a think and do box, but I think that that's quite a good idea to have as well, for sure. Okay, so what are some examples people have got then? Some come up with a general routine.
I think I would always, like, as soon as I've lost the point, straight away I would think, like, technically, if I went wrong, why,
Mm-hmm.
went wrong and how.
Okay.
That would be, like, along the front wall.
Yeah.
I would kind of walk across the front wall to, like, either side that I was.
Sure.
And then I think, like, once I come further back, then I'll always, like, wipe my hand, like, do my wristband and then bounce the ball. And then around
Nice.
that time it's like, how I'm going to, like, win the next point.
Okay.
Because I just find that if I do the technical stuff first,
Yeah.
it's like fresh in my mind, like when it went wrong or how. Whereas
Sure.
If I was to do it later, I would just forget, like, the feeling of it.
That's good. Yeah. Awesome. So get your technical stuff over and done with, and then you move up, do a couple of behaviors like wiping your hand, bouncing, but then thinking about how you're going to win the next point as well. What about if you're receiving? The start will generally be the same.
Yeah, the start would always be the same, like technical straight
Mhm.
away. If I've lost it because of that, and then it would just be like wiping my hand and fixing my wristband. I don't
Cool.
know.
Okay.
It's just what.
Nice. And you still think, how am I going to win the next point?
Yeah, why I lost the first or lost the previous one. So that would kind of be more towards the start.
More
like
towards the start.
technical.
Okay.
That would be like, because I think generally you either lose a point like technically something went wrong, or like tactically you're getting it wrong.
Mhm.
You did something, let them hit from like certain areas,
Sure.
and that would be like the first thing. Just otherwise, I would just like if it came like 10-15 seconds later, I just wouldn't be able to
Yeah.
remember it.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. Anyone else?
I guess it's kind of like, for me, it would kind of be like a circle.
Okay.
As such, like you start, like you kind of walk from where you are, say you're in the middle of the court, you walk forward, kind of do all the problem solving part there, and kind of transition into, from there back into, so when you come back to the receive serve, for example, or serve, it's like, right, I'm ready to go. So it's like the process goes around in a circle, and then it's like, so you go from, well, what happened in that rally? How am I going to change it, or am I going to change it? Then go through like, am I ready? So like wiping your hand, bounce the ball, whatever, and then you come back to like the service box. Because
Sure.
generally people stand to receive service and the service look at service, so it's quite a good point to come back to, and it's like the full circle is complete rather than going off on tangents.
Yeah. Okay. I like it. Yeah. So essentially what this session was to do was just raise awareness of how important in between points are, and to make you think a little bit about what you do in between points, and is that beneficial? Are there any more things that you could be doing that are extremely beneficial? Something that I've noticed from watching is people don't take enough time just to breathe. And you're about to serve or you're about to receive, where being loose and being relaxed is extremely important, as well as many other things. But if you're not taking that deep breath, it's going to be difficult to be as fully relaxed, and for your body to be as loose as possible, for sure. So that's always a really good one, and whenever I do that with people I work with, that's the thing that really makes a big difference. So I would definitely consider that one. Essentially, these slides are going to be sent through so you can refer back to them, but I think it's important for you individually to come up with a good routine and go and practice it. Obviously, if we have individual sessions, bring it back to me and we can discuss it further. But I think it is important that you do go in with a routine and keep that consistent in between points, because at the end of the day, all of this is within your control. What happens during points is out with your control. Yeah? Does that make sense? Okay, so We spoke about importance. We spoke about how routines and things you do in between points, if they're consistent, that can help with momentum. We spoke about reactions after good and bad points, and we noticed that these reactions were generally the same thing, or should be the same, or within the same structure. You're obviously going to be thinking about different things, but you can have a pretty consistent structure with that. And we thought about is having routines a good thing for you guys to do. So take all of this information, like I said, have a play around with it. Go on court next time you're having a hit with someone. Maybe try a couple of things in a specific order and see if it works well. If it works well, great, keep on top of it. If not, maybe have a think about some other things that you can do. But at the end of the day, having a nice structure in between points can make you feel more in control, because you're in control of all of this stuff, and it can make you feel more comfortable going into the next point as well. Yeah? Perfect. So yeah, any questions, just drop me an email. Okay? Sorted.